WHBQ Memphis.
10 o'clock. Hello there. Sheila with the best music in the South. Boy, was this a great weekend for me. I got to read for my first movie. Yeah, they let me read for the town drunk. Boy, do I hate typecasting. WHBQ, aye, indeed. 'Twas a sad, sad story they tell, matey. Sheila with Gordon Lightfoot in the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Yeah, saw Edmund just the other day, and he was definitely wrecked. WHBQ will make and serve the biggest hot dog in the world, and the Q crew wants you to be there. More details coming up within the hour. Sheila, hey, somebody, get the birds out of here. WHBQ and Sheila Dickie-Doo Edwards will be counting down the Memphis Big 30, beginning tomorrow night at 6. Dickie's the only guy I know who can do that on the fingers of one hand. WHBQ. The political race is getting hot. Governor Carter calling President Ford all sorts of things over his Eastern Europe comment, calling him irresponsible and insensitive. I protest that. I don't think the president is insensitive. He couldn't be and bruise that easily.
WHBQ Memphis.
11 o'clock and Sheila with the best music in the South.
I'm Dave Williams. This is Sheila with an exclamation point and no last name, as far as I'm concerned anyway. She didn't have a last name when we worked together at WHBQ in Memphis. And she was one of the first women disc jockeys that I'm aware of. This is why I wanted to talk to you. Since then, you have acquired a last name or a couple of them, but the one that you're going by professionally is Sheila York. Is that okay that I say it that way?
Yes, Sheila York.
But I mean, professionally.
Name, yeah.
Because you're a novelist now.
As well as, working the job that actually pays for the mortgage. Yes, I do.
Right. That makes you a real writer, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. You know what? I'm thinking when I met you, correct me if I'm wrong, because memory is a tricky thing. I think I know, but you could tell me, no, that's not the way it happened at all. I think I hired you at WHBQ.
Yes.
Yeah. And where were you before that?
I'm sorry, your memory is just fine.
Well, that wasn't much. We got a ways to go. Where were you working at the time before that?
I was working at, I actually can't remember the call letters. I think I've repressed them. It was a radio station that belonged to the TV station that was Peabody Hotel. They had their offices in the basement. I have thought about that and thought, I could look it up, but I'm like, nah.
That was in Memphis?
That was in Memphis.
Okay.
And I cannot remember how I came onto your radar, nor can I remember the first time you contacted me.
No, me neither.
I do remember that we had some really pleasant conversations, and I felt very comfortable with you. And then things kind of went south at that other radio station because there was a union dispute. And
you had a union in Memphis in the middle 70s?
No, that was the dispute. We wanted one and the management didn't.
I see.
But it caused a lot of bad feelings, and because I was one of the movers and shakers, I actually ended up being taken off the air.
Wow.
Yes, and I remember you and I had conversations, and then the second they told me, I went into an office, closed the door, picked up the phone, called you, and said, "Dave, I'm taken off the air," and you said something along the lines of, "Oh, great, you can come work here."
Yeah, I don't remember any of that either.
It was like, okay.
I'd like to go back to kind of the beginning, get a little bit on the background of your life. I read your bio and your story on your website, a really good website. It's SheilaYork.com. You can go look at it while we're talking here if you like. You pretty much grew up all over the world, didn't you?
I did. Well, all over the world as I would have known it as a kid. It certainly seemed very, but it was mostly in the United States. And then my father had a tour of duty in Germany. He was a career Army officer, and back then a lot of people moved frequently. They would shift the military around where they needed more people, and it was not unusual for families to to move every 2 to 3 years. And we did. I was born in New Jersey, where I'm living now, about 10 miles away from where my parents were living when I was born.
That's funny.
Then we moved to Pennsylvania. My father was sent to Korea during the Korean War, so we were living with my grandparents. Then to Virginia, then to Kentucky. So I figured, and then we went to Germany and back to Tennessee, where eventually my parents settled. So that's what, 6 times before I was 10.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it seemed entirely normal to you at the time. I mean, being that age, because we always think about, oh, the poor kids, they don't have any stability and they don't get to make friends and stuff. That was just your life, right?
It was my life, and how well prepared for being a disc jockey was I?
That's right. That's right. They always say that you can tell a disc jockey in the parking lot because there's no rust on his bumper hitch. So, as a student in school, when you were a kid, were you a good student? Were there particular subjects that you excelled in?
I was a very good student, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, my sister Barbara and I were very close together in age, and later in high school, I think I was a good student because she would tell me what was on last year's exam in that particular class. Because
Oh, yeah, that's helpful.
in school.
And it's not cheating.
Oh, and well, the fact that I was writing
It's studying.
papers might have been.
Yeah.
But in grade school and in what they call middle school now, yeah, I was a very good student. History
Hmm.
was my favorite subject.
Wonder if that partially because you did spend time in other countries, in different cultures.
I don't know where. I've often thought about why children have certain.
Or maybe it was just that you had one specific teacher who was really impressive.
Well, yes, that is absolutely true. My love of history blossomed under a teacher called Betty Jo Wallace.
Hmm.
Joe spelled Joe.
Really?
Yeah, she was a pioneer. She really loved history, and she taught me civics, which people don't teach anymore. And I just loved to read history, and I liked English, and that I liked talking about literature, but I never read any of the books
Right.
that were on the list. I was always busy reading other books.
Yeah.
I went through all of the John Steinbeck while we were supposedly reading Jane Eyre, and there was my sister then prompting me for the test. Or okay, now after she goes to the yeah, I didn't enjoy school. I was very, very shy.
Hmm.
A lot of anxiety, and I wonder if that did have something to do with traveling so much. I think I was naturally.
I don't know, but I do know from my own experience, many years, there are a lot of really shy people in radio. And you, with your psychology background, you might understand that better than I do. I tend to think that we're sort of compensating on one hand, and on another, like you, I have some theater background. I did a lot of stage plays, and I've done a lot of emceeing of big events and so forth. I can stand on a stage and talk to 5,000 people or play a role in front of 300 or 500 people, no problem at all. But it comes down to talking to one or two. That's really nervous. That's really nerve-wracking for me. And in radio, you can't see those people, right?
So you can imagine, as they tell you to do, that person that you're talking to.
Yeah, they always told you that. And that was one of the things, Sheila, that I learned after a number of years of doing radio. It's like, first of all, you learn all the rules, and then you learn when to ignore the rules. And that was the first one I ignored. It's like, that's ridiculous. How can I pretend I'm talking to one person? I know that there are thousands out there. I can't see them. I can't hear them. All I can do is just, know that they're there and do my thing.
I would imagine many different people. Like if I was on the air at 4 a.m, I imagine the person who's in the bakery. I knew what
Uh,
that guy, and or the cab driver, or the nurses in the hospital listening to us, late night.
mm.
And I pictured that scene and talking to them. It was easier for me
No,
than
you did it right.
if you're seeing 1,000 people. That for a shy person is really intimidating.
All right, let's get you into your radio career, but before we can get there, we have to go through college. You got some advanced degree in psychology, didn't you? How did that happen?
Well, that happened because I probably didn't make it clear on the bio. I did graduate work in
Oh,
psychology, University of Tennessee,
hmm.
but it was not too far into the whatever the 3-year program, whatever it was, that I realized that that was not a career that I just I was not prepared to be a psychologist.
What was the interest that led you to it in the first place?
I like understanding a little bit more about how people behaved, and I
Yeah.
became very much into child psychology.
Mm.
Yeah, I was for a while. I did some intern work when I was in undergraduate school at where the university I went to, which is Austin P State University in Tennessee, in Clarksville, Tennessee. Um, they had a daycare center, and seeing those kids and how they were, and following through my reading their developmental levels, and it was a wonderful thing. But I didn't think it was something that I was even emotionally prepared to do professionally. I realized that maybe part of my interest in psychology was trying to figure out my own issues. They say that's somewhat true,
Well,
but
I always had a really deep interest in psychology and still do. In fact, when I was going through high school, I thought, okay, that's the road I'm going to take in college. But I didn't, because I was in radio by then, and they kept changing my shift, and I was doing what I wanted to do, so I just never went that route. But over time, I started to realize that that would be a very difficult thing for me to do too, because of my own emotional instability. Well, seriously, at one point,
oh,
I
that's
would.
what it is. I was emotionally unstable.
Well, many years ago, I was actually diagnosed with clinical depression, and after having a number of people talk to me about my relationship with my mother, and I'm watching the dollars click off the clock, and I finally got a physician who just said, "Why don't we try you on some medication and see if that helps?" It helped, and it works, and I'm fine now. But that would have been difficult. Now, but I read something in your website that you were actually going down the road toward psychological research. Is that right? Was it
Yeah,
research?
yeah. I was studying. I did some statistical studies, and so when people tell me now, well, I did this survey, and I'm going, oh, really? How many participants? How did you select them? Were they this? Were they that? I was
Yeah.
and you can plump up a thing. Then it's not a scientific survey, dear.
Uh,
I
Anecdotal.
experiments with animals, rats, behavioral sorts of things, which I really loved. I had a pet white rat for a while,
Mhm.
and he aged, he passed. But
So, what got you into radio?
I was actually
And how old were you?
uh 22, which is rather old for disc jockeys, because men, they're DJing when they're 14, and they've got, like your voice, they've got a nice deep voice, but they're 14.
Right.
But that wasn't even on my radar. I did like performing. As you said, it's a lot easier to perform when you're doing a role
Hmm.
than I I was when I left school, when I left graduate school, I found an ad. It was actually in the newspaper. They were looking for young women to audition to be the weekend weather girl
Ooh.
at WBIR.
Mhm.
Yes, they called us weather girls back then. And I went and auditioned, and they gave me the part.
Really? This
Did
is in
it?
Kentucky?
Oh no, this was in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Oh,
That's where.
At Knoxville. That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Um, and I was the weekend weather girl for a while. And then the woman who was doing it during the week got a got a good job in Nashville, and they decided to hire somebody to do all of the weather. She'd just be there all the time.
Wow.
Uh, yeah, I think maybe they just said the weather on Saturday nights or Sunday nights. They'd have the anchor do it,
Right.
and have the girl in the skirt pointing to the weather map.
Right.
Uh, so I got laid off from that one, but in the interim, I had met their, they had a radio station, and the program director there was named Ken McGavin, who was looking for someone who was quantifiable to be a disc jockey. They were looking for a woman.
Quantifiable in what sense?
That's it. When the people who really felt that it was time to put women on the air,
Uh-huh.
they would have trouble finding one who was already qualified.
Hmm.
So they found somebody who was qualifiable, who
I
would
see.
do it. Some people would say, well, there aren't any qualified. It's really hard to tell. It's a very small pool of people. They go, well, why is that? That's sort of a vicious circle
Yeah.
rationalization. But Ken gave me a chance, and wow, and had a lot of faith, because being a disc jockey is a lot different than being on television. There's so many things, and there was actually a lot of manual stuff that you had to do back then, with the
Hmm.
queuing up the things, queuing up the records, and making sure you didn't knock into the turntable and then you
Right.
turn it up and there's no sound, or you're in the middle of the song. It was there were a lot of things you had to keep track of, and I had absolutely no experience. So that was a big leap of faith on his part.
But apparently it worked out.
It
How
did
long were
work.
you there?
Let's see, that was uh, less than a year.
Hmm.
And then I moved to Memphis because a friend of mine had a contact in he was doing graduate work, and he knew some people who worked at the radio station I just mentioned that was in the Peabody, and whose call letters I've completely repressed.
Yes.
Um, but he knew some people, and I took my little recording, took my air check, and went down, and I had an interview, and they hired me. First, I was working at another company. I was doing another job. I was working
Uh-huh.
in a company, full time, and then doing weekends on the Memphis radio station at an easy listening station.
WREC.
Oh, WREC recording. I mean, okay, right. How can you repress?
WREC. You don't even have to say the W, just it's rec radio, right?
Um, but the people, and the people there were actually very kind to me, and they were very helpful. The difficulty became later when they were purchased by another company, which I've also repressed the name of, and that's when things got kind of weird. So the people who were there then were very helpful, and gave me advice.
So you were doing, wait a minute, let me see if I get this straight now. And maybe there's some step that we've missed, but you went from weekend weather girl to like full-time weather girl
briefly.
to easy listening disc jockey.
Well, yes, to easy listening. I was doing those two things sort of at the same time.
And then from there, to RKO radio in Memphis, WHBQ?
Mm, Wow, maybe if I told you that, you would have had second thoughts.
Listen,
Mhm.
that is an amazing leap, because that type of radio, boss radio, top 40 RKO style radio, was it was what everybody in rock and top 40 wanted to do, to work for an RKO station, and you
RKO.
just bounced right into it. And I don't, like I said, I don't remember the whole hiring process, but I can tell you one thing that I do know, just listening to this air check. And this air check from 1976, so you were hired a year or two before that. But listen to this thing. You were there. You were on it. Listen.
Mid-South weather, got a 50% chance of rain today, high 83, 50% chance tonight, low 69. Currently in Memphis, 73 at WHBQ. WHBQ, keep on rocking me, baby. Off that Fly Like an Eagle album, that's Steve Miller with Sheila, going from Phoenix to Tacoma to Philadelphia to Atlanta to L.A. I think that guy ought to have a talk with his manager. WHBQ and Lou Rawls with Sheila. Oh, you're never going to find another love like mine. So my advice to you is to stop lusting after other women in your heart, quit committing adultery with your eyes, and stop giving interviews to Playboy magazine. WHBQ. Going to be serving the biggest hot dog in the world, and the Q crew wants you to be there. More details coming up. Yeah. WHBQ. Oh, yeah. Major Harris. We all practice our deep breathing exercises. 12:42, and Sheila, for you, love won't let me wait. Love there having the same effect on me as 4 cups of coffee, except love doesn't stain your teeth. WHBQ, Tavares and Sheila, heaven must be missing. Yeah, well, speaking of that, they're going to be exploring the possibility of life on Mars at 7:30 Monday night at the Raleigh Branch Library, 3157 Powers Road. Rick Collins, how am I supposed to be concentrating on reading this very important public service announcement when you are playing with my body?
You are
Skip the public service announcement. Play with my body. WHBQ and Sheila going to get out of here and judge the Why I'm Glad Rick Dees is Coming to the Q contest for the evening with Chicago. Rick Collins up next to do it for you. He's got under his arm a copy of the new Playboy magazine with the Jimmy Carter interview. Rick Collins, I'm surprised. I didn't know you read Playboy magazine.
Hey, now, wait a minute. We got to make this clear. I do not read Playboy magazine.
Oh?
I just look at the pictures like everybody else.
You were not only one of the first women in, young contemporary music radio, but you were absolutely hot. You jumped out of the speaker. You were very, very clever. Every break had something kind of remarkable in it, and I'd say you're a natural. Now, the other question I have for you about that period of time. Oh, let me just stop there and ask you your feelings about what I just said, and how you got to that point, how you got that way with really no experience in contemporary music radio.
I listened to WHBQ.
Yeah.
You
That pretty
know,
well says it.
I listened to Mason Dixon and George Klein and
Dude Walker.
oh, Dude Walker, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, golly. And J. Michael,
Right.
whom we have
Yeah.
lost.
Is he gone?
He is.
I didn't know. I haven't talked to, I got in touch with Dude very briefly a few years ago, but yeah, I've kind of lost track of all those people. But anyway, okay, so you just heard it and did it. That's pretty
I-
much
It was, kind of imitation. I think there's I'm going to ask you if this is true, whether you think it's true that when you're in some sort of artistic or performance, you sort of start off imitating the people you admire,
sure.
style they have, the way they present.
It's true with writing too.
It is absolutely true with writing. Yeah, I woke up one morning and thought I was Raymond Chandler. And then,
But there were no women for you to
No.
to be your models.
No, I had heard some women on the radio. I mean, I was certainly not the first, but they were doing different kinds of radio on
Right.
stations that I could pick up where I was living. So that was, no, I guess I just did, what sounded good. Yeah,
Yeah.
there was no role model.
I should say, for those of you who just heard that these pieces of Sheila on the air back in the 70s on WHBQ, I should explain for those of you not familiar with the sound of music radio in those days. It probably got you laughing like crazy because it sounds corny, it sounds hyped. That's what it was. That's the way it was. The development of the 50s and 60s disc jockeys who were full of patter, right? Always had this, a lot of alliteration and a lot of fast talking and so forth. It was an evolutionary step from there to what became known as the RKO sound. It was the big problem, I'll tell you, that I had in Memphis was all the RKO stations, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Boston, us, we all sounded alike, really good, but alike. And I guess the corporation liked that. I got to Memphis. I said, this is not a Memphis sounding radio station. And I had a constant battle with Los Angeles over music. They wouldn't let me play any Southern rock, any regional type of music, to try to actually attract the people who live there. And the DJ approach was the same too, but I had no problem with that. It was fun. So I did a little digression there. So how long were you there, WHBQ? You moved on to Houston, I think.
Yes, I was there maybe about 3 years. I really can't remember now, like 73, 74. Yes, because I went to Houston in 77 or 78.
Were you working a kilt there?
I did.
Another big station. Yeah, and a major market.
In a major market. And Houston was booming. The traffic was bumper to bumper. The ribs were great. And except in the summer, the weather was fabulous.
Yeah.
And it was an exciting time to be in Houston because it was happening.
Yeah.
They were growing leaps and bounds. Everybody was coming to Texas for, the jobs. The economy was booming.
That's why I'm here now.
That was it. I'm sorry?
I said, that's why I'm here now in Texas.
Oh, yes.
I'm in Dallas. So
I have a soft spot in my heart for Texas.
I think everybody does. I think almost everybody in the country or in the world for that matter wants to be a Texan to some degree, more or less.
Very story about everything that summed up Houston.
Okay.
Southwest Freeway. They used to have a venue where they played basketball and did concerts. It was called Summit, and they had this big billboard that hung over the freeway, so you would know what's coming up.
Feel free to name drop radio people in there because we're going to have a lot of radio people looking at this.
Name drop, my goodness. Well, this is what happened at Summit, and then I'll name drop some people.
Okay.
Like Bo Weaver and Captain Jack, and
Bo Weaver works here in Dallas now. I know him.
Yeah. Ow, I thought he was still in California.
No, not for a long time.
Every once in a while, I hear his voice on a commercial or something. And I go, that's Bo. I know that's Bo.
Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm driving up the freeway, and here is the billboard. And it says, tonight, Houston versus the United States.
That's great. You got my attention. What does it mean?
Game, and I thought, that pretty much sums it up.
What was it for?
Oh, it was a basketball game of some
Oh.
sort. Sporting event. Yeah, that was, I left that part out, sorry.
Well, maybe you said it and I just didn't catch it.
I thought, I laughed. I thought, yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a Texas thing. And it also speaks of a better time in advertising, but we don't need to go down that road. So when you were in Houston, did they call you just Sheila, just the one name?
Yes.
Yeah. Why is that, do you think? Do you have any idea? Have you thought about that? Because the only reason and I'm not even sure that I'm the one that said, let's just call you Sheila with no last name. Maybe that's how you came to me. I don't remember, but I do
No,
know.
did
Pardon?
not. No, I was using both names.
Okay. I do know that RKO had another female disc jockey in San Francisco. It might have actually been a little bit after you. I can't remember. Her name was Shauna.
I know her.
Do you?
Yes.
And that just kind of seemed to be a trend at the time. And I don't know if that was just, made you stand out or what, but I always say I put the exclamation point after your name because you had that, we called it the jock jingle, the shout. It was Sheila, 56 HBQ. And it was really pow right there.
Right there.
And then there's your voice.
I was not very fond of my birth last name, and I didn't think it sounded good on the air. So, and
Lipschitz? Sheila Lipschitz.
it just didn't feel like me.
Hmm.
I was fine with having one name.
Oh, yeah.
And we did the bit out of it where I was going to find a last name because I didn't have one, and then decided that didn't work, and so we went back to Sheila. When I came to New York after I left Houston, I was offered a job in New York.
Oh, wait a minute. You went from Houston to New York?
Yes.
Okay. I hope you understand. Maybe you don't. I want you to appreciate that most of the jocks that I've known in my career have worked for like 25 years to get to a major market, to get to Houston. Getting to New York from there is like, you got to really, really be special. You really do. So there you are. Job number 4, the Big Apple. Go ahead and explain it. What station?
When I first came up here, it was WNSR.
Okay.
Which was no, I'm sorry. I had 2 jobs in New York, and
okay.
I went to work. I was working in Houston, and they had a change in management. And the guy who took over as program director did not think they were going to change to country music. And he didn't think I was quite right for country music.
Mm-hmm.
Then I got a job offer in New York from WHM, which was the world's largest country music station. Sweet revenge.
Yes.
And Dean Hallam, who was the program director then, and Brian Moores, who was the station manager. They listened to the air check. They brought me up. They offered me up, and I had to sell my house in Houston. My poor husband was like, "Okay, honey, you got to sell the car, you got to sell the house, you got to move everything, and then here because I'm in New York." He was, that was a job, and I did that. Did country music for about 5 years. In the early '80s, we were also the New York Mets radio station for a while. The great Tim McCarver just passed.
Oh yes, he just passed.
Everything I know about tactics and nuance in baseball started with Tim.
Oh.
Ralph Kiner, also the baseball great, was a partner. Ralph used to listen to the country music radio station. I once met him, and it was one of the nicest things anybody ever said to me. He shook my hand and said, "You really know baseball." And I was thinking, well, I learned it from you.
That's cool.
Yeah, he was a guy. He let me do they brought me into the control group once and let me do the that thing without express written consent by,
Oh, yeah.
it used to be slightly longer and there was a word in it that was hard to pronounce. You could stumble over it, and Ralph kind of stumbled over words.
I'm trying to think of it because I've heard that disclaimer so many hundreds or thousands of times. But
But I sent him a letter once and give him some advice on how to pronounce that word.
Yeah.
Treat it as words and just go in one word. Just treat it as one word, and the rest of it will come. And so he invites me into the control box, the broadcast booth, and goes, "Okay, you do it."
That's fun. What fun.
Was fun. I got to do a little bit of work during the 1986 World Series, doing pregame interviews with people, just little color thing. And Bob Costas was, it's sort of in the earlier early mid part of his career, and so I got to meet him and work with him. It was, that was some fun, and interview country music stars. I had Reba McEntire on the show before when she'd had only like maybe 2 songs.
That was before she got her accent.
No.
I'm sorry. I've always accused her of really, really slathering it on when she gets in front of a camera.
She may have, because in that character.
Yeah.
And I just said hello to her and she took the whole interview. It was the easiest interview I've ever done in my life.
I hate those. Yeah.
And I interviewed the Judds and Glenn Campbell, and it was high times in Manhattan.
You know what? I've interviewed a lot of really famous people. Interviewed Jimmy Carter. Too many movie stars and TV stars to mention, and country music stars. Good heavens! Had Forever and Ever, amen. I can't think of his name now. Anyway, he came and did an hour with me in Los Angeles, and he was just wonderful. He sang his song and dedicated it to my wife because that was our song, Forever and Ever, amen. And then one time I had an opportunity to meet Willie Nelson. We went to a concert. It was in a small rodeo venue outside of Sacramento in Folsom. And it was small. It was a dirt arena. And we had folding chairs on the dirt. And that was like the best way in the world possible to see Willie Nelson. This was in the 80s. So, I mean, he was at the height of his fame. And he did a great show. And then he stepped off the stage and just wandered into the crowd, started shaking hands and signing autographs and taking pictures and all that stuff. When we finally got to him, I was absolutely, completely catatonic. Couldn't say a word. My wife said, "Okay, Willie, a great show. Can you sign our tickets here?" And he did, and he smiled, and he kind of flirted with her a little bit, I think. And then, and I'm just standing there with a stupid grin on my face. And then finally she said, "My husband has a morning radio show here in the area, and he was wondering if you would be able to talk with him on the phone for a few minutes tomorrow morning." He says, "Oh, darling, we're going to be halfway across the country by then." He says, "The bus is out packed, warming up right now. We'll probably be toward, closing in on Utah." So, and there were no cell phones in those days. So, okay, understood. Well, thank you very much. Had a great time. And I know that Willie walked away from there going, "Radio? The guy doesn't even talk." I was just so starstruck. All right.
Yeah, I know that feeling. There were times I would I
Right.
remember when
Or you ask a great question and then somebody gives you a 2-word answer, and now there's no place to go because you don't have your next question ready, and there's no way to comment on that 2-word answer. Right? So you just stand there looking stupid. And it's like when you're on stage, you'll know this too. When somebody, if you go up on your line, if you forget your line, and you're just looking at the other person and you don't even know you forgot your line. So you look very confident and you're just calmly waiting for them to talk, but it's your turn. And it makes them look stupid because they have to try to fill in and get you to come up with the correct response. Well, you really got me spinning off track here. So
That'll,
huh?
that'll happen when you get to just chatting with each other. You go off
So
and on.
you're in New York. What happened next? Is your radio career about to come wind down here and you start writing, or what?
I had started writing. Well, I'd always really been writing. I think I tried my hands at some things when I was a kid, and then I would write some material for some of the disc jockeys. You know, if I had a good line or something that they could use on a morning show,
Yeah.
who you have more time to talk. But as far as a novel, I started writing in New York City seriously. And I, for whatever reason, thought that I was going to write a science fiction novel, and I don't even read science fiction. So, but my husband reads a lot of science fiction.
Yeah. He's a writer too, isn't he?
Is David Nybert. He has a couple of science fiction novels and 3 mysteries that have been published.
Wow.
He's working on a book now that's very different from that, and I was going to tell you, but I don't. It's a story about a family that during the Secret War in Memphis. I mean, it's a very serious subject, and
I'm sorry, I didn't catch his name. What's his name?
David Nybert.
Oh, okay.
So I started writing because he was writing. He gave me the confidence that I could do that. And after the science fiction debacle, I never did finish that. It's upstairs in the attic in a file cabinet, along with the first romance novel I ever wrote.
Yeah.
Yes, which turned out to be about 700 pages long. Yes. And then I started writing about what I really like. And what I really like: mysteries and movies. And I'm particularly fond of post-war Hollywood movies. They're not, many of them are not great movies because the studio system, they would plug an actor into a role or an actress who just wasn't ready. It's the wrong. But the stars were always so interesting. And the stories, once I learned more about the production code that ruled Hollywood from the early 30s to, well, it broke down in the 60s, even though it was supposed to be still enforced, where you couldn't say a lot of things, you couldn't do a lot of things. The myth that you always had to have one foot on the floor if you sat down on the bed, people were sitting on the bed. It's not a myth. It is a myth, but it was some of the things, kisses couldn't last more than, this period of time. Wasn't part of the regulation, but it is what people would sometimes do. They'd be very aware that if you kissed longer than 3 seconds, that you might have to cut the scene and refilm it or something.
Unwritten rules. Yeah.
And I started writing a book. Like I told you earlier, I woke up one morning and thought I was Raymond Chandler. I started writing a book. You couldn't write a book about private detective and post-war Hollywood. I mean, geez, that has been done, and brilliantly. But you could write a story about a woman who has to go see one of them because she gets in very big trouble. And they end up solving this mystery. There's a couple of killings, sort of in stormy tandem. You can write that book. You can write the heroine of the story is screenwriter, a script doctor. She she's sort of below the radar. You know, she's a script doctor. They
Yeah.
hire her bungalow and she's supposed to come up with brilliant dialogue.
Yeah, they don't even get their name on the screen, right?
Don't get their name on the screen. They do not get screen credit. So, and she goes from project to project, so she can be in different places so that there's not always a murder going on at the studio at which she's working, which I thought that we don't want to do the J.D. Fletcher thing.
Right.
Would you ever invite that woman to dinner? She was, anyway, I have a bit of an allergy and I'm having to sip some water.
That's okay. So you've written a series of mysteries. That's what mystery writers like to do, right? Take one, and romance writers take one character and make a series out.
Solve them and carry them through a series, because it's if the fans fall in love with these characters, they will follow them.
Yeah.
And 4 books so far. The first one where she meets the private detective. Oh, her name is Lauren Atwill, by the way.
Lauren Atwill.
Atwill, yes, Atwill, not. It was a placeholder name actually, and then I became very fond of it because when I was writing it, I had a poster of the Hound of the Baskervilles, that the original Hound of the Baskervilles sitting hanging on the wall, and I just was picking up names. I was like, okay, this person's and I used some of those last names, and Lionel Atwill was in the movie, so
There you go.
yeah, but I tried other names that I didn't like. There she is. 4 in that series. The first one is called Starstruck Dead, and
Did you have, was that immediately accepted for publication, or did you have to go through a lot of?
book, when it was originally called Dead Level, was I wrote that in the 80s, no, the early 90s maybe. Finished it, sent it around, got some really nice rejection letters.
Mhm.
And then I got other things came up, like earning a living, and I picked it up again in the late 90s, thinking, well, you know, if not now, when? And I serendipitously, I was at that time working as an editor at Morgan Stanley in their research production department. And one of the temps that I hired to help us get out an annual report happened to know an agent. I couldn't believe it. She said, "Oh, I know an agent. I'll introduce you." I mean, yeah, but you know, when you get really lucky, you need to be prepared. So I took the manuscript to
Well, there's luck, and there's also natural talent. I read that first chapter that you put in of your latest book, I guess, and it's in your website, and I'm really, really impressed. I've done some writing myself, and I'm really impressed. And I'm wondering, how much training or self-education did you do, or is it just, did it just roll out of your keyboard that way?
nothing rolls out of your keyboard. You wait for the day, you hope for the day that something will roll out of your keyboard. And if it does roll out of your keyboard, maybe the next morning you wake up and go, what was I thinking? Oh, delete, 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 delete. The story, I liked the story very much. And it never comes easily, but it was certainly something that I was very, very committed to. And I wrote, once it was accepted by the agent, she had some rewrites she wanted me to do. And I did the rewrites. And then she submitted it. And it took, it was about 6 months. It hung around in places. And then finally, we sold it. And then I wanted another book. So I like, and this is something you probably know. If somebody says, oh, and you have a follow-up for this, right? You have a sequel. You nod your head and say yes,
Of course.
very firmly. Oh, yes. I didn't. I took around with an idea, so I'm like madly finishing the second book. And then the third one was, and the fourth one, as you say, just came out. It's called No Broken Hearts. And of course, there are lots of broken hearts in that book. It's I think it might be my favorite book. With Hero, there are a couple of characters in there that are inspired by actual people whom I either didn't like or loved.
Right. Right. I've written some plays, and I'm messing around with some from novel length material, but I found it when I was writing characters, writing dialogue in particular, that it was very helpful for me to have somebody that I knew pretty well in mind, because I would get their rhythm of their voice, the words that they would use that might be a little different from somebody else. Is it that kind of little trick? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, they have to all have an independent voice.
Right.
They can say sort of the same words, but if actions while they're doing it, something that's particular to them, yeah, they definitely have to have a particular way of talking, and you have to hear it.
Yeah.
That's why I often, in fact, my heroine does this sometimes because it's something I do. You pick something up and you hold it in between your fingers like a cigarette, because everybody was smoking. Lauren
Right.
doesn't, but she'd be doing that and talking to herself, and then she'd talk as the other character in dialogue,
Uh-huh.
and then sit down and write the dialogue for the screenplay, because you gotta hear it. Reading out loud in that voice, reading your material out loud can be very helpful.
Hmm.
If you hear then you hear that you haven't quite captured the way you imagine that voice. There are a few words, there's a rhythm, maybe they speak haltingly. And how do you do that
Right.
if you're writing, if you're writing dialogue? But you need to capture those particular characters. And if you've got a character that sounds too much like the other one, maybe you kill one. Just get rid of one of them. I don't mean kill them off in the book, but just compress them.
So somebody going to take one of these stories to the big screen?
Don't we wish? So few books.
Yeah.
You know how long it took to get Lee Child on the screen, for goodness sake, to get Jack Reacher in the movies. It took forever. No,
Sure.
his book had to have been optioned.
Now that all the movies are made by Marvel,
Oh, I'm not into,
and remakes of classics, I've never understood why anybody would remake a classic. You have no way to succeed.
yeah, how is that going to work, actually? Although, I'm not sure that the original West Side Story is considered a classic. I mean, it was a big movie at its time.
Yeah.
But I thought the recent one was amazing.
Who did that? Who was that? It wasn't Spielberg, was it? It was somebody of that nature. That
Okay, I could look it up.
Oh, well, it's all right. It doesn't matter. Anybody who wants to know can look it up.
Yeah, I thought the acting was wonderful and the choreography was, but they come out in actual streets in New York City.
Right.
You couldn't
Yep.
do it.
Well, listen, we're coming up on an hour here, and I don't want to keep you, and just tell you that it's been really, really fun getting to know you. When we worked together, first of all, it was a very brief period of time. Secondly, you were on the air from, I think, 10 at night until like 2 in the morning, right? And and I would come in at normal working hours around 7 or 8 in the morning, And so we never saw each other. I suppose we had you know, exchanged notes, memos, and so forth.
Yeah, there'd be a memo in the box. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. But you were terrific. Always enjoyed working with you. Always very proud to have been the one to put you on the air there, because you, as we'll hear again with another little piece of your radio work in Memphis, you were just powerfully enthusiastic and very positive and full of fun. And you were that way in the hallways too. And I can see that hasn't changed. That's nice.
I'm still an extrovert uh, when I need to be. I want to thank you. I mean, something that you brought out, which I wanted to talk about, is that it was a big leap for me to go from sort of an easy listening, light, soft rock. Well, it was really more easy listening to being a rock jock. And if I hadn't done that, the rest would not have followed. If you hadn't hired me.
Now I do now remember, once we were talking about the Peabody Hotel, and that kind of rang a bell. So while you were talking a little while ago, I went to a web browser and punched it in. I go, oh yes, WREC, and I remember now that that's where you came from. So yeah. All right, Sheila, thank you so much. I'll stay in touch. Okay.
I will. Just try to stop me.
Wish you a lot of continued success with your writing and your charmed life. I'm sure you've had down times, but you do seem to have had a charmed life.
I have had a very fortunate life.
Yeah.
And some of it is luck, with the talent, of course, as you say, but it has worked out pretty darn well. I'm very happy.
That's great. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Carry on.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.